Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to February's Lunch and Learn. I am joined today by Kelly Henderson, and with Form Families Forward, I'm going to give her the opportunity to tell you more about herself. And today we're going to talk about the upcoming shift of going back to school in whatever form that is going to look like, as ordered by the governor. And then also some more tips about being able to help with virtual school, and because I think the order is that it's still going to be some virtual stuff too. So we're not quite done with that yet. But here is Kelly to take us away.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for joining us, those of you who are joining us live. And if you're watching this after the fact, welcome. I know that it is a hectic time, which is actually part of the purpose of this topic, because things are changing. It seems like we've been in flux for a really, really long time. But this seems to be a new area of flux of where we're
It seems like
headed back to school. And so I'm going to talk briefly about that reality. We're going to talk a little bit about special education and what that might be looking like during this transition period. And then we are going to get into, as Nicole said, some more of the virtual learning tools. We're going to actually just focus on some virtual learning tools around social, emotional, and behavioral supports, because we are hearing from lots of families that this has gotten to be a really long road, and we might be in for a check up or a tune up on some of our strategies, whether you're home with your kiddos full time, or if there's a hybrid situation and you still have some time at home and some time in the school for them. Henderson. I am so thrilled to be here. I am the director of an organization called Form Families Forward. I'll tell you in a moment a little bit more about us. And I'm really, really pleased to have been a now quite a long-standing member of the advisory board for Virginia Family Network at NAMI. So thrilled to be here. So very briefly, Form Families Forward is a nonprofit. We are a family-led organization. We focus largely on Northern Virginia families supporting foster, adoptive, and kinship families who are raising children and youth and young adults with special needs. We also work pretty extensively with professionals who serve our families. So that's sort of our little corner of the world, is that focus on foster, adoptive, and kinship families who have children with special needs. And while a lot of our funding and a lot of our focus is special education, we recognize and live the reality of touching many systems. So lots and lots of our families are impacted by mental health needs and concerns. Lots of our families are impacted by social services of many types. Some of our families have connected with the court system in various array of ways. And so we know that if we're going to serve a family and serve a kid, that we need to be touching all those systems that connect with that family. So we do our best to support families through classes, through trainings. We do direct one-on-one consultations that could be in person or it could be virtual, to sort of meet the family where they are, talk about where you've been, where the journey has brought you to date, where you want to go, and where and what strategies can help you get there. So we do a lot of systems navigation. We have peer support groups, including a virtual peer support group for parents and caregivers that meets twice a month on Tuesdays. We have a peer support group for youth and young adults. If you happen to be in Northern Virginia, that is on site in Fairfax, again, twice a month, Tuesday nights. For ages 14 to 22-year-olds. We have a child care. If you're watching this live or in the near future, we have a child care program for Fairfax and Falls Church families who are raising kids with a behavioral health concern. Free childcare, 15 hours a week for 8 weeks. We will reimburse your child care provider. We will do a background check. So that's a really cool new program that we're standing up with the support of Healthy Minds Fairfax. So all this information is on our website. I'm talking fast, but you can always go to our website and get lots more information. We have lots and lots of resources, web pages that talk about specific things, including lots of special education stuff. And everything we do is free of charge to families. My email is there on the right-hand side of your screen, our website, which is just the hub of all things Form Families Forward, and we are on social media, including Facebook. So today, if you know anything about executive functioning and the most recent information we have on brain science around trauma and traumatic stress, hopefully you'll get the humor of this little cartoon. One of my trauma informed parenting friends sent that to me. Many of us moms, particularly, but all of us who are parenting or caregiving may have had these moments in the last year where we have taken on a lot of things that we didn't necessarily expect or were as prepared to take on. So it is exhausting, and I recognize that this road just continues to seem to get longer. We have some little hopeful signs along the edges of the road, but it is a long road. So today we're going to talk about the governor's order that Nicole mentioned in terms of the return to school. We'll talk a little bit about special education, which can be a bit dry, but if you have a child with a disability in your life, and it is a good time for a check-in, just a review of sort of rights and responsibilities under COVID. What does IDEA say about special education under these extenuating circumstances? What options do you have to perhaps supplement what has been happening or not been happening for your kid going forward as we think about trying to recover some of the learning losses. And then finally, we're going to get out of that procedural rights and responsibility stuff and get onto those virtual tools. And again, we're going to focus more around those virtual tools that you can use at home to support social, emotional, behavioral needs. So hopefully that's a plan that works for you. If you're watching a recording, you're certainly welcome to skip forward to those sections that mean the most or are most relevant for you. There are three main sources for what I'm pulling from this conversation. In October, again, mid-pandemic, we had a guest attorney come and speak to us in a webinar on special education. So she was speaking as an attorney. She works at the Parent Training and Information Center in DC, but she spoke specifically to issues in Virginia and obviously did it from a much more procedural lens. So I'm going to pull some of what she talked about. That whole webinar is available on our website. You can pull that whole thing and watch it and replay and get all of her slides if you're interested. Very recently, less than a week ago, Hank Millward from the Virginia Department of Education did a webinar on recovery services. And don't worry, you're going to find out what that means shortly from the Virginia Department of Education lens on what they believe children with disabilities can be receiving during this COVID sort of period. And that was hosted by the Fairfax SEPTA or Special Education PTA. That is available. That link, if I think, Nicole, we're going to have a way to get them these handouts.
I already put it in the comment section below. So there is a link to a Google form, and that'll bring you to all the other links that Kelly has put together for us.
Awesome. Thank you. So the Fairfax SEPTA has that broadcast available, and you could listen to him live describing recovery services. And then the last piece of what we're going to talk about today are those virtual learning tools. And we did a full webinar, on the 11th of September and talked about a lot of virtual learning tools, including some emotional behavioral tools that I'm going to cover today. But if you want more on that, there's a link there to that webinar. So that's what I'm pulling from. Let's talk about the governor's order. So Governor Northam on February 5th calls on all public school divisions to make in-person learning options available by March 15th. So I'm going to point out that some of the language on this page calls on, recommends, and will be supporting are some of the words that are described on this page. And if you take a look at his order, it is, I think order may be a loose term. So it's not as directive as we had seen back in March, where he said, schools are closing, and there's no debate about it. So this is a request, a forceful request, perhaps. So the expectation is there that school divisions will be back in person to some degree by March 15th. So I think there's a recognition that school divisions, localities are in very different places across our Commonwealth. And so I think his order tries to take that into consideration. So you can find the full order online. And he was, in that order, he's very clear that it needs to be consistent with health guidance that was issued by the VDH on January 15th. And that little graphic there in the upper right-hand corner, the guiding principles, was what was described in that health guidance. I believe that may have been taken from the CDC. Now I'm not sure if that graphic's from the CDC or the Virginia Health Department, to be honest, but it's from one of them. And the other thing that was just very recently updated, actually post the order, was the February 12th update of the operational strategy for K-12 schools, and that was a CDC publication. So two good guidance documents, one from the state, one from the feds, to help schools make these key decisions on how to return to school in a way that's going to benefit the learning of all kids, but also the physical health concerns. So in addition to that order, the language about the return to school in some fashion by March 15th, there was discussion in the order about summer learning opportunities. Again, they will be supporting local decisions around expanding. So that isn't a you will deliver, you will provide. It was not that directive. It was much broader, giving a lot more leeway. But the idea that probably some funding will be available and other supports from the State Department to support more summer options, some summer learning options. So, and that's for all kids, not just kids with disabilities who may have extended school year. Those options still remain a procedural expectation. So,
for my locality, when it comes to the summer school, is usually if your child's not doing well, it's a free service. And then if you just wanted your child to have more support in the summer, although they did well during the school year, there's a charge for it. From what Colonial Heights is doing is it's now just a free across the board. So if you feel like your child's struggling, or you just feel like they're not doing to their full potential and you don't want them to kind of lose any more, that summer learning is going to be an option for everyone, although they're not quite sure if it's going to be an in-person or complete virtual summer learning experience.
Well, that's great to know. So in your division, Nicole, it sounds like that whatever it is will be available free of charge to anybody who shows interest. So that's great. So it sounds like they've drawn that line in the sand. So I think it's going to be very division specific. And again, like I said, if you have a child with a disability who does get extended school year services or may be eligible, that is a guarantee. Whether that will be remote or in person, again, is a lot up to the division. So let's move off the order and just know that that's the reality. And actually, VDOE has a web page on their website that gives a status update of where divisions are in the return to school, how they are delivering instruction. I have to say that it's not updated particularly frequently. They were updating it once a month, so it is there, but it may not be the most up to date. If you're trying to compare across the Commonwealth, you should be able to get your specific division's return to learning plan from them directly, and that should be pretty clear at this point, knowing that, of course, a lot of it may be in flux based on the public health indicators that are laid out in those guidance documents. So 4 slides next are on the special education piece. I think if you are listening to this and you know what I'm talking about, you're going to understand some of the acronyms I'm using. So if you have a child with a disability who's receiving special education, who has an IEP, an individualized education program, they are receiving those services through something called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. That's the federal law. The states take that federal law and have to promulgate regulations. And so Virginia has a set of very of longstanding Virginia regulations, and I have a link to that in a couple more slides, so don't worry about writing that down. And IDA is extremely specific about what that rights to special education involves, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So as Maria indicated in October, and this is still true, special education is still special education. It has the same legal meaning and standing as it's always had. COVID has not altered that. If you have a child with a disability, they still have the right to a free, appropriate public education. And you as parent or caregiver of those children have certain rights. Those rights remain the same. So none of the requirements outlined in IDEA and in our state education regulations can be waived. So the state can't just say, oh, COVID's been a problem. We're gonna eliminate your right to a FAPE for this year. That is not possible. The Federal Department of Education has made that very, very clear, and the Virginia Department of Education has confirmed that. So any requirements for IEP development, review, and revision, evaluating, that's initial evaluation or reevaluation for eligibility, the provision of special education services, and how they're going to collect data, what their requirements for progress monitoring, and funding are all still in place. Everything is still as it was. However, given the COVID circumstances, particularly when everybody was pretty much virtual, or not at all, those methods to meet those requirements may look different during this COVID. And again, Federal Department of Ed and the State Department of Ed acknowledge that that's a reality. So what is special education right now during distance or hybrid learning? So special education fundamentally is individualized instruction that is specifically, uniquely designed to meet the needs of a student. And that's purposely a singular. So it's not like we have a plan for kids with learning disabilities in the school. You have a plan for an individual child, Kelly, with a learning disability. And that is absolutely foundational to this law and the right. Again, individualized education program, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is absolutely specific to that child. The goals, the present level of performance, all of those are specific to that individual child. COVID-19 response during this time makes it really clear that special education is a bundle of services. It is not a place. So the delivery of specialized instruction does not depend on a child being in a hard brick and mortar classroom. They can continue to receive specialized services. And special education right now still does what it's always done, provide access to the general education curriculum, creates a right to an appropriately ambitious education, and protects the child's rights. And that appropriately ambitious education is phrasing that comes from case law that clarifies that we are not dumbing down something for a child with a disability, but we are expecting them to achieve rigorous goals and allow them access to the general education curriculum. Okay, so if your eyes are glazing over on special education, we only have one more slide on this, so stick with me. So when we go back to school, whether that's hybrid or full-time in person, it is really important to remember that IEPs are goal-driven, substantive documents, not just checklists. So it is truly the P in IEP, and this is one of the things that gets me all the time, because some people call an IEP a plan, and it is not. The check the regs. It is actually a program, the Individualized Education Program. It is a program of services and supports. Yes, it's planful, but it is a program. It is defining exactly what extent and breadth of services are going to be delivered to this child. So it is for them to meet their goals, their individualized goals. So in that plan, as we begin to think about going back, you want to make sure that we're really clear on where that child is now. And you, parent, caregiver, have had a unique opportunity in this last year to get a really good up close and personal picture of where that child is now, because you may be the one with the most eyes on and the one living this experience right next to them as they're learning at their desk in their bedroom or on the dining room table or the kitchen table. And so you may be a major source and should be a major source of information about where that child is now. School still had an obligation to continue to collect information as they were learning virtually, but you really are a key source of information. If at any point during this process, as you begin to think about the return to school, if you ask for a service, or if you asked for a service during virtual learning and those services were declined, it is important that you get an explanation of why they were declined or rejected. And you should have received, and if you did not receive, you should ask for a prior written notice, which is a required statement under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that basically says the school system is declining this request from a parent, and this is why. These are the grounds for that denial. And that is really important for you to have because as we think about the services we'll talk about in a moment, recovery services and compensatory service, that's information that you may need to bring to bear as we move forward. So why were those services not accepted? Why were they rejected? So this is from Maria saying, consider compensatory education. And we'll talk a little bit in Virginia, those kinds of services in the COVID context are being called recovery services. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but those terms for conversational purposes are going to be used interchangeably for this conversation. A legal scholar or an attorney would probably tell you that they are indeed different technically, but right now, as we think about moving our kids forward into a more in-person learning situation and beginning to try to recover some of what was lost this past year, the term recovery services is what's being used in Virginia. And obviously we want those services to be useful and usable, and that during our COVID circumstances, it's okay to be creative, to do something different, to do something unique, because we know the circumstances are unique. So I want to highlight this green phrase at the bottom. Families have always needed to monitor their child's progress towards goals. And we know that has always been an obligation, and to make sure that the child's IEP is being implemented. And that may be taking your own data, collecting your own evidence, your own observations. But obviously right now it is extremely important because we need to be able to know where our child is, where they have been, and where there are gaps or an area for remediation. And we'll talk about that in a moment, why that's so important. So let's now get into the other area of nitty-gritty policy talk, and that's this idea of recovery versus compensatory services. So this is no longer what Maria shared with us because more of a Virginia concept. So over on the left is compensatory services. Compensatory services is not actually something you will find in IDA law as defined in IDA law, but it is referenced in the statute and the regulations. And compensatory services, so keeping your sort of setting aside COVID for now, compensatory services has been around. That concept has been around for a long, long time. And it's used when the school failed to implement the child's IEP, failed to evaluate or reevaluate the child, or there were other violations of special education law and regulations that impacted on the child's ability to access a free, appropriate public education. So basically the school was negligent in their delivery of services to this child. So that's compensatory services. What's highlighted here is a phrase directly from VDOE, where they are, during this sort of COVID recovery period, they are making a statement about the use of the term compensatory services and preferring to use the term recovery services. So while this is straight from VDOE, while IDA provides for compensatory services when there's a denial of FAPE, the services offered by Virginia school divisions to address a loss of services due to COVID-19 should be referred to as COVID recovery services. So you will likely hear, hopefully you will hear very soon, if you haven't already, from your school division about a conversation around recovery services. You may not hear the term compensatory services because Virginia is making the case that the compensatory services, that the failure to implement an IEP due to school closure, due to COVID, was not the scenario that we should be operating under, but rather we should be looking at recovery services. So this is really Virginia's, on the right-hand side, Virginia's clarification of what those recovery services might be. And again, this is State Department of Education. So you may not have seen this yet from your local division. And you may not see it voluntarily. You may need to ask about it. So just be aware that there's not a requirement, it appears, there's not a requirement that from the Virginia Department of Education that school systems reach out and make families aware of this. Rather, right now, a lot of the obligation, it appears, is on the backs of the families to ask about it. So I'm not going to make a judgment statement on that. It just seems to be where we are right now. So do familiarize yourself with the information that I'll share on recovery services, and there are some formal documents that you can review as well. So recovery services focuses on recoupment, so recouping content lost due to the time away from school. Families may need to request recovery services, and an IEP team meeting should be held. It is very clear in the VDOE clarifications that the IEP team is still the mover and the shaker for these kids with disabilities. And this is a quote, the team should look at the totality of circumstances for each student and determining the amount of service needed to remedy the educational deficits resulting from a failure to provide FAPE during COVID. So it is not an hour for hour. They are very clear that it is not an hour for hour. So if your child missed 5 weeks, 10 weeks of services, and within that time they missed, 60 hours of instruction, you should not expect 60 hours of additional services to be provided. It is not an hour for hour remedy. And Virginia Department of Education does clarify and acknowledge that parental input is key, and parent information and concerns must be considered in determining whether or not COVID recovery services are necessary for free, appropriate public education, how much service time is needed, and how the services will be delivered. So they acknowledge very clearly that we have had our eyes on our kiddos. We're the ones in many cases that are doing the progress monitoring. And so they acknowledge that it will be important for schools to seek and use parental input. They use the term parental input because that is a special ed word, parent, but we know that many times kinship caregivers and others are involved playing the parental role. So that still applies. So that's a lot of information. Nicole, did anything I say just like completely blow your mind, or should I continue to go on? Are we good?
I am feeling good about everything that you're talking about. It's making sense. It's looking good. And we've awesome. Definitely had some people who are watching along with us. No questions yet, but okay. I think we're all following along.
Great. It is not the easiest thing to process. And I think a lot of things are certainly in flux, but these are 4 really important resources. If you're going to sort of drill down on what families could benefit from. 2 things that are very specific to COVID, and those are the ones on the left in the blue. There is a document called VDOE Considerations for COVID Recovery Services for Students with Disabilities. And that's where I pulled some of the language that was on that previous slide. So that is really, really key. And again, probably not going to be offered to you at this point by your school division. So you may want to just pull that up. The links are there in the slides, and take a look at that. Lots of clarification, I think, about what VDOE is saying should be considered recovery services, and the role of the IP team and of parents and caregivers are made pretty clear in that document. Along the way, VDOE has also had what's called this FAQ, and it's evolved a bit. There were some changes in fall. I think the most recent one is dated October. It is online at their website, so you can get the most recent one. Those are frequently asked questions that do address recovery services, but also a lot of other special education related questions and content during the COVID situation. And so all of those still apply. And then on the right side are tried and true, hopefully things that are already in your backpack or on your nightstand or on your desk. Things that you may be referring to regularly are going to become even more important to be able to put your hands on, and that's the regulations. Those regulations have not changed. All of those expectations are still valid. And then your procedural safeguards notice from your school. There is a state template for that state procedural safeguard notice, but usually your specific safeguard notice will have your school system's name at the top. And you usually get that every time, or you're at least offered it every time there is an IEP meeting or a reevaluation meeting, because you have a right to those procedural safeguards, and it does define the dispute resolution processes, as well as other rights and responsibilities. So I'm going to stop there. That's in terms of all of that gobbledygook, in terms of the requirements, the rights and responsibilities under IDA, sort of where we are at a state level with those recovery services. Basically, if you have, as a parent or caregiver, real concerns about a loss of instruction, a loss of learning, then you need to dig into those recovery services and start asking questions. School systems are slowly beginning to figure out what they're going to do about that, what they're going to be offering, as Nicole said, to all kids, and then what additional services that might be more specialized for your kiddo that has a disability. And extended school year is going to sort of work into the mix too, since we are beginning to look at that summer. So just know that sometimes the creaky wheel gets the grease, and so you know, asking questions, saying, "Hey, I just heard about this recovery services. What can you tell me about that?" And asking your special education department chair, the team lead, your case manager, whatever that person is in your life, in your child's life, is a good place to start. So now I'm going to move into a little bit of some hopefully more exciting and useful, immediately useful tools. I love this picture. One of my friends was taking a walk in the snow up here a couple weeks ago when we had a storm, and she stumbled on this and took a picture. And I thought it was just delightful, because it really reminds us that kiddos miss those connections, that the ability to connect through school, while they may not love the homework, they may not love all of the assignments, that school is a major factor in many of our children's lives, and they have lost that for now, 11 months, as a stable force. And so that need for connection with teachers, the need for connection with other educators, the need for connection with their peers is just a reality in their life. Developmentally, they need to be in connection. And so for many families, it has been a really long year. For many kids, it's been a really long year. For many teachers trying to do this remotely, it's been a really long year. So as we think about that return to school, we know even in the best case scenarios, most school systems are not going back full-time, 5 days a week, regular full-size classes. It's just not possible under the COVID precautions. So kids will still be doing some learning from home. And there will be families that choose not to send a child back for medical reasons, for social emotional reasons. Some kids have flourished. Some kids that might have had some issues with school anxiety or social other social challenges. They may be very comparatively happy working from home. And so I'm going to offer you some tools. And these are focused around social, emotional, and behavior supports. And the attachment, the resource that I think Nicole has linked in that Google Doc, provides you 3 pages of links of tools that you can access, not just social emotional, but some academic ones are in there too. But really, like, make and take. You can click into it, you can print these off, you can customize them, but just things that, again, we're sort of midway through the school year. some of us might be a little burnt out from all of the tricks we have tried and just wanting a new bag of tools. And so these are just some things. So thinking about our young kids, some things that, again, you might be using or might just need a refresh: cue cards, social stories, regulation visuals. And those are things that help particularly young kids or children that are more developmentally disabled have a physical reminder of some regulation strategies that might work for them, and then sensory supports. So again, lots of resources on that are linked on that resource page, but here are a few of those. And again, we're focusing on younger kids right now. In the upper left are some tools from CSEFEL, which is a national center. Let me see if I can, I think, I'm going to do some moving around here, Nicole. So I'm going to stop share for a second and see if I can get.
While you're pulling that up, we did get a question talking about kind of the going back to school, if that's what parents choose once things open up a little more. Do we know yet if they are going to do a return to learning meeting, especially for the kids that do have IEPs?
So that is not required. They do not have to, I should say, VDOE does not appear, nor do the feds require a return to learn meeting. You, as a parent or caregiver, can absolutely always request an IEP meeting, conduct an IEP addendum. You can do that virtually. Almost all divisions have options for doing that virtually. You can do it, again, depending on circumstances, in person, and have that conversation. Sometimes schools are adopting different written tools to clarify what those services are going to look like. And certainly the LRE statements, the least restrictive environment statements in the IEP, may need to be revisited because the intensity of services, the location of services, are those services being provided in self-contained settings versus general education or environments with other non-disabled peers, that may look different now as we return to learn. So return to school. I'm trying not to say return to learn because these kids have been learning under your guidance a long time. But as their physical circumstances change, they may need to make adjustments on that services page. Sometimes it's called on the IEP, but that section that talks about where and how much services are being provided.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the resources that you'll find on that resource sheet. This shows scripted stories, social stories, different ways of different tools for developing support plans. Let me just click on the scripted story here. Nicole, am I showing, are you able to see what I'm doing, clicking around here?
Yes.
Okay. So here's an example of, I can use my words. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. No, it's sending me to PowerPoint. But it has a variety of scripted stories that you can use with a child that sort of helps them give language to some skills that they may need. So when they're frustrated, when they're struggling to maybe regulate, that these are some words that you can give them. You sort of talk them through the story. You can, the really cool thing about this is a PowerPoint, so you can adapt it, adjust it, customize it to your needs. And obviously in this case, this picture with the teacher walking them out to playground, that may look a little bit different right now. So you can customize these stories and have it meet the needs of the environment in which your child is it's learning right now. So this is an example of giving actual scripts for the child, the young child, to, when they're feeling frustrated, what can they say? And you think that many kids should instinctively know that, and we know that for many of our children that's not the case, that they actually need direct instruction and reinforcement of those techniques. So that's just one example. Let me see if I can flip back real quickly. So this page is chock full of some of those tools that you can, again, download and customize. I want to share a feelings thermometer, and this is a tool from the Wisconsin, and this is the First Lady of Wisconsin talking about it. So hopefully this video will work.
To stay safer at home due to COVID-19, this time provides us new opportunities to bond and spend time with family, but it can also be very difficult. As parents and kids work, learn, and now summer vacation from home, it can be emotionally stressful and exhausting. That's why the Office of Children's Mental Health is launching a new tool to share with families to help navigate these emotions. The feeling thermometer is a visual tool that helps everyone from kids to adult measure how they are doing emotionally and what steps you can take to shift the mood when it gets tough. The readings on the thermometer are easy for even your youngest family member to understand. Go from blue, the calm zone, all the way to red, the furious zone, with suggested activities for each zone. You can make the feelings thermometer a part of your home by posting it on the refrigerator and encouraging the whole family to take their emotional temperature as often as you would like to stay in the happier blue zones. Research tells us that just identifying a calming activity can work to reduce anxiety. And in these days of uncertainty and disrupted activities, working as a family to identify feelings, reduce anxiety, and find balance will help everyone feel better. Thank you and be well.
All right. So hopefully that gave you a little sense of that feelings of thermometer. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint, I think. Let's do a stop share. So many clicks. All right, so hopefully you're seeing this. So that's the feelings thermometer there on the upper right. And again, there's a link in that list of resources that Nicole has provided you. These are some other tools. Again, lots of great sensory focused strategies to help calm kids and help them identify strategies that are going to help keep them in that zone of regulation that we talk about. There on the left is a sensory tube. It's really just a water bottle with some little sea animals put in there. You can also put glitter or sequins in there. Little tiny beads also work really well in the water bottle. And then when the child is frustrated or needs to take a time out, they can shake that up, and the time it takes for all of the sequins or the toys or the beads to settle is the time that they are using to do their breathing or their thinking or whatever terminology you're using to bring them back into self-regulation. There in the middle is a little weighted snake that you can make out of a old sock, and there's some instructions linked in the handout again that allow you to do that. You can use rice or beans and just sock, and that weight can be sometimes very helpful. That heavy pressure for some children does help a child bring themselves sort of back into physical regulation, and that supports their self-regulation emotionally and socially as well. There's weighted blankets you can buy, I think, on Amazon. There's weighted throws now. It's almost out there in very wide use. You can find lots of weighted products. And then the last tool there in the upper right is a first then chart. And it's very simple. Again, we're talking about younger children. It is simply the task, the demand that you really want done. That might be a harder ask for the child. First, we're going to clean up, then we're going to eat. And it gives a child a very clear scenario order of operations, lets them know what's going to happen, and you can just use picture symbols or words. You don't need to use a formal picture symbol set, although I did link that. You can purchase those picture symbol sets, or you can ask your school teacher to assist you with that, because most of them do have access to something called Board Maker that allows them to print off or give you access to some of the most common symbols. But you can literally just use clip art and create your own picture symbols for the first then chart. But it really does give the child a real sense of structure and expectation, and makes it very clear, and it reduces that verbal back and forth that sometimes gets a little heated with our kids home all the time. So reducing that back and forth, but just being very, very clear about what's going to happen next. And then some tools for our older kids. So again, still focusing on regulation. We're going to up the ante from that first then board to a more of a token board situation tool, and we'll talk about that. Really thinking about how we're recognizing and incentivizing some of the choices that our kids make and helping them see the value in using regulation and using appropriate social emotional interactions. And then where possible, really, especially now as we're thinking about hybrid, trying to reinforce each other, schools and home. Are we using the same language? Are we setting the same expectations? Are we using the same type of incentive systems? Here is a tool that is from Beyond Consequences. Again, I provided a link. I think this is the one for secondary. There's an elementary and a secondary set, but the idea is very similar. This is from Heather Forbes' work at Beyond Consequences. The idea is that we all have a window of tolerance, and that window of tolerance allows us to sort of take in demands and respond to them appropriately. And so on the left is a very wide window of tolerance, and that dotted line at the top is sort of our breaking point, things that sort of push us over the edge or set us off, or may prompt dysregulation or an outburst or refusal. That breaking point is very different for all of us. All of us, including parents and caregivers, have that breaking point. And right now, as we looking at that purple, this kiddo or this individual has a very wide window of tolerance. Their level of stress is low, and so they have a lot of tolerance for demand. So if somebody asks them to do something that they didn't expect, something they don't want to do, something they don't like to do, they can cope with it. They have a big, wide window of tolerance. On the right, though, is a kiddo who's extremely stressed. There's a high level of stress. The breaking point is very close to that level of stress. And so that window of tolerance is very, very small. And so it tells the kids, it's a visual to remind us that we're in a point of high stress, and that this might not be the time that we want to ask the kid to take on a new demand. It might not be the time that that child wants to take on something new. It might be the time that the child takes an opportunity to hopefully do something that's a well-rehearsed break for that child. So those are some of those tools. Other tools for our older kids, in the upper right is a token board. We're going to talk about that. And then the other two things here featured here are contracts of sorts. The one is a template, on one on the left, the template for a home school agreement. This, I think, is really valuable. You do not need to do it in all of the areas listed. You can completely customize it to your needs, what the student is agreeing to do, what the parent or caregiver is agreeing to do, and what the school's piece of that is. So it could just be on attendance. It could be on attendance plus group work. It could be in all of those areas, but being very, very explicit about the expectations. And then you'll see at the very bottom of it is sort of the recognition. So once all of those actions have been met, what is the incentive? What is the positive consequence for doing those things? It could be a very natural consequence. They'll get an A on that test. They'll be able to participate in their sport activity. They'll be able to go out to dinner, or it could be something much more explicit that's created just for that child, because they may be asking for a bigger lift. Behavior contracts are always great tools if done well, and not in a punitive way, but really thinking about what positive proactive strategies and steps we want a child to be engaged in, and then being really clear about what those incentives or recognitions are going to be. This one is one with siblings, which may hit close to home if you have a lot of kiddos in at-home learning, but it could be anything. And then finally, let's see, where are we on time? I have about a 2-minute video. Nicole, do we have time for that on token boards? Okay. So let me switch to that. This one on the upper right is a type of token board, and I have a video that I'm going to share with you about how one might token board.
Hi, everyone. One of the things that we use really often is a token board. So a few of the reasons that a token board is really great is, one, it starts to be a really good visual to the learner to know when reinforcement is available. We can direct them to say, oh, only 3 more check marks until you get your snack, or 5 more check marks. And it also works to increase the amount of time that they're working. So at the beginning of a program, a student might start getting reinforcement after every correct response, and that might be a small edible or a quick toy. And what we want to do as we progress is make that reinforcement seem more natural and happen less often. So the token board is a great way to extend the amount of time that they're working before they access the reinforcement. Another great thing about it is that it's really adaptable. As the child grows, it can look very different, where at the beginning it might be a little more unnatural. We can make it look a lot more natural, to the point where it may even be a nice little chore chart where you can give them points and stars for doing the behaviors that you want them to do.
You can also make a token board very cheap and easily by drawing circles out on a piece of paper and giving them check marks or happy faces. I've had kids work for, what animal do you want me to make out of this circle in order to access your reinforcer? A lot of people ask me, well, great, I see how you set up a token board, but how exactly do you use it? And the first thing that we say is make sure the learner knows exactly what they're getting a token for. So define the behavior in question. You get a token when you answer this correctly, or you get a token when you engage in X, Y, and Z, period. And then how many tokens do you need? Do you need 10 tokens? Do you need 50 tokens? Do you need 5 tokens? What we typically say is make sure that they're accessing reinforcement quite often. So, once every 5 minutes or so. It shouldn't be once an hour or once every 3 hours. The magnitude of their responding should equal what they're working for. So if they're working really, 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 really hard, they should get more than a 30-second clip of a YouTube video. Or if they've just done 5 tokens, it's taken them about 3 minutes, they shouldn't get 6 minutes of a YouTube video. So we always work on that as well. The other thing we want to do is we want to define what exactly they receive. So we assume that they want the YouTube video, but maybe we need to just ask them, what do you want to work for? Or if they're nonverbal, we can say, great, like, do you want this one or this one, and see which one they pull up. So making sure that what they're working for too is also really valuable, so that those tokens mean a lot to them. Some learners we work with don't even want anything, they just want the program to be over, which is also a really nice visual. Look, 10 more and you're done this program, we're done, we can take a break. So that also works.
Token boards are very relatable in my house. It was finding what they would work for. And when my daughter was younger, it really was just being done.
Yeah.
But the visual helped. My son was more of wanting something.
Yeah.
But sometimes something was just like an extra treat. So it was just finding what works. But once you can find it, they work good.
Yeah. And we have these things that are called a fancy name is reinforcement menus, but you really do just watching and asking questions about what they really like. I mean, again, we don't want to over rely on tangibles. We want, eventually our goal is to get most children to a point where they're intrinsically motivated to complete some of those tasks. And always, including a praise statement when you are giving a token, because we want them to value the interpersonal as well. But yeah, it can be really valuable, and being very clear and explicit about expectations is huge. So that concludes our very quick whirlwind through some visual virtual learning tools for social emotional behavior. There's lots on that resource sheet. I encourage you to look at that. And we end that resource sheet with some really nice brief videos about how you can just create your own tools, your own behavior charts, your own progress monitoring, sort of how are you keeping track of their performance, whether it's academic or behavioral or social. How can you adjust, just use a basic Word template or a table template to create a document that's going to help you in the home, and be, again, really explicit about expectations, and that sometimes it can reduce potential for conflict and smooth out the day. So this is me. This is our social media handles. So you're more than welcome to join us. We would love to connect that way as well. Any questions? Anything that's come up, Nicole?
You've answered the questions that came up. I put the link for the resources in the comment box, but I'm also going to make a separate post of it just so it's right there, easy to find. And in the comment box, I've also put the Form Family Forward link to your website, so that would be easy for them to find too. But everything was really, understandable and made things clear about what's kind of moving forward in the school world and how to continue to help our kids with the new way that things are. I also wanted to mention that we have a contact at the Virginia Department of Education, and her name is Tracy Lee, and she's the Family Engagement Coordinator. And she was letting us know that there is a COVID-19 task force that's being formed. And kind of once that comes together, they'll absolutely have more answers and stuff for us too. And that may be where we get more specifics for each school district of what things are going to look like moving forward. So I'm also going to put her email in the comments below. So if you want to reach out about what's my school district doing, what are my next steps, that you have a way in there also. But I want to thank you again, Kelly. You've provided a lot of great information for us as always. And thank you so much for sharing.
Sure, glad to be here. And I will put the slides on our website as well in case folks just need to go to that, and because the links within the slides may be helpful as well.
That's what I was going to ask. I know you shared the slides with me. If anyone emails me and asks if they could have the slides,
yeah.
Share them far and wide.
Yep, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Kelly.
All right, thank you. Everyone be safe and well.